Hey there guys, Normus Trading Cards, and today I want to talk about over triggers. They're a genuine impact on the overdress format, as well as premium, but mostly overdress, that's what I've tested more than anything, as well as the possible future card design of the cards, and my personal feelings as a whole for both casual and competitive play. With that being said, let's go on ahead and get started. So, first off, what exactly is an over trigger for anyone who does not know, which pretty much all of us do, but there are some people that also don't quite understand the rulings on them, so let me go ahead and go over them. So, over triggers are a type of trigger that you can only have one of in your deck. Whenever you drive or damage check them, they grant 100 million power instead of the traditional 10,000, as well as if you draw into it, it's a 50,000 shield. The reason I say that if you draw into it is because whenever you do trigger check it, it removes itself from game and draws you a card. So in this way, it acts as a pseudo 5th heal, but since it never goes to the damage, no damage zone effects will trigger, as well as you don't get the counter charge like you normally would with a heal, which is a little, a little sad, but it's understandable. You gotta balance it somehow. But as well as whenever you dry check the card, it has an additional effect. Right now we only know the Cray Elemental one from the starter decks, as well as the Dragon Empire from the booster pack, which their effects respectively is, the Cray Elemental one says you apply the 100 million power a second time, as well as the Dragon Empire one stands the Vanguard, so you're like, I'm coming in for this 100 million power now, as well as I'm standing to come at you again, which if that is super powerful, like... But admittedly, the chances of you doing drive checking that, especially at a crucial time, is rather low, but it will come up. Which brings into the ultimate discussion of over triggers, their impact on the card game itself. Now, there's a lot of big divide, to say the least, about over triggers. Well, I'm still not a huge fan of the 100 million power buff in a competitive sense. In a casual sense, I love over triggers. Casual games, over triggers feel like they were perfectly designed for. They're just these crazy one-up things that can turn the game around, and they're super fun. However, there is the major problem of competitive play. Vanguard's already a competitive game that relies on RNG heavily, so whenever you have this one-of RNG card that literally turns the game around, unlike with a normal trigger, a lot of times you need to have like 2 or sometimes 3 to properly turn the game around, it's a card that can single-handedly turn the game around and provide so much power that it can literally shut down turns, especially if you check it defensively, because you can give that 100 million power to the Vanguard, so unless they drive check and over trigger in response, that means your Vanguard cannot be hit for the rest of the turn, as well as you draw a card and that damage is healed out. But do note that if it was in a chain of multiple damage, so if you got hit by a 3 crit attack and it was your first damage, even though you can't be hit essentially because you get the extra 100 million power, you do continue to resolve the damage, so you will take the additional second and third damage respectively from that one attack, which is something that a lot of people actually don't seem to understand. But so now if you were ever wondering that, which definitely is a big deal. Now, because they're one-of, you don't get to check them that often. In fact, a lot of times you'll draw into it or soul charge it, at worst cost, which... In all of the Dark States playtesting I've done so far for both the starter deck and Borrow Magnus from the booster, I almost always soul charge the overtrigger. Why? Why? Maybe those decks are already really good without the overtrigger, so what's not. But of course there is the big problem of when it does go off in a crucial time. Now, when is this crucial time? A lot of times the crucial time when an overtrigger actually has effect, since it doesn't provide any extra crit and you're only given the power to one unit usually, unless it's the Cray Elemental one. That means that you're still doing that one extra damage, and it basically confirms the damage out of PG is what it does. It's only if that unit has multiple crits does it really become scary, or on a restanding unit. So, depending on when it's checked, it can be really crucial and other times not. If you check in the early game, well, it can either deal pressure doing it offensively or reduce pressure when you get it defensively. A lot of times in the first 2, if not 3 turns, that over trigger has actually very little effect, surprisingly, on the game. It definitely has a noticeable effect, but not much more than your typical heal or critical would at that given same amount of time, which is actually very interesting. So you get into this really interesting thing that while these over triggers are over the top and insane, if you check them in the first 2 to 3 turns of the game, they actually have very little impact and almost become like misses their potential. But in the last 1 to 2 turns of the game, which is usually on your turn 4 to 5, sometimes maybe 6, because I've actually seen a lot of these overdress games that test have actually gone to turn 6. That's whenever they become super impactful. Because if an over trigger is checked on your turn 5 or plus, it's almost always going to basically be the win or loss of that game. And that's, just simply how it is, which is perfectly fine for a casual game. They're super fun. I personally enjoy over triggers on the casual game. But when you get to a competitive game, it is a super, super annoying thing. Whenever everything's going right, you've calculated their triggers, you've done a no pass that's not a PG, and they hit the over trigger and right through your shield, or they're at 4 damage, and you're like, alright, I'm going to pressure them this attack, and all my attacks will go through, and I've confirmed that they don't have enough to guard this. And then on that 5th damage, they hit the over trigger, and you can't hit them for the rest of the turn, and that was the only way you were going to kill them, and now you've lost. So when it does come up during those crucial turns, it is the most soul-wrenching, annoying thing in a competitive game. And unfortunately, the biggest issue with this is that Vanguard tournaments on average are only best of 1. And admittedly, if this was best of 3 for most tournaments, I don't think many people would complain as much with the over triggers. And, I personally would be super excited if we went best of 3, in which case, please, Bushiroad, give us a 10-card side deck. I know in Japan, from what I've heard from my friends in Japan, that play over there, 2-deck format is actually more popular than the traditional side deck, at least for Vanguard, which is mind-blowing to me. Sure, it's fun. I like it. 2-deck format is fun, but I personally would prefer just a best of 3 with a side deck. Give us like a 10-card side deck. Make it 5 cards if for some reason you really wanted to limit it. Just something. But of course, I know the reason they don't is because the fact that regionals rounds take an hour and a half, an hour 20, an hour and a half to get to the next round, between waiting for people to go into time and getting all the results and posting the results. And with Vanguard games taking an average of like 15 to 20 minutes on for a normal game, a competitive game can easily push to that 30-40 minute mark, which is most of the time when you're in a super heated competitive game and no one got super sacked in the beginning. So it makes going best of 3 really weird. And I've seen best of 3 regionals. I've participated in one of them, and a lot of times they would go into time in the second game, which means that they would, if you were 1-1, it would just be the first person to deal the first damage in game 3, which is like, okay, it doesn't feel like you actually got a proper best of 3, but it's still better than just a normal best of 1. And frankly, I'd much rather have that than a normal best of 1. But I understand why Bushiroad's tournament compromise or tournament setup is not a best of 3 for Vanguard because of the natural game length of it, unless we got longer rounds, which is going to be really hard because while you would normally saw this was a 2-day event, which a lot of the bigger card games will end up doing for the regionals, Vanguard now has 3 formats, and they need to support all 3 formats at regionals, and that's not very fun. And there's also talk about them at physical regionals doing 0 things as well there, off to the side, like a side fight thing. So the juggling of the multiple formats is going to be the biggest problem. If we just had standard and premium, it'd be like, okay, you could have both standard and premium day 1, essentially, and then have their follow-ups on the next day. Sure, you'd have to choose which one, and it would suck, but, you would just simply go with that. Or make it, I guess, to where you would have technically, I don't know, it'd be really hard, just because of the multiple formats and how long games take in Vanguard. Setting up that competitive format to allow for best of 3 is not easy, and thus we are in this current state that we're in. So the only real solution to over triggers in competitive games is just to basically Bushiroad to say they're not allowed in level 2 or higher tournaments, which is regional or higher, or to give us best of 3. And then, like I said, if they do give us best of 3, please give us a side deck. It would be extremely helpful, especially with how great deck building is going to be in Overdress. It's already, from the few booster set cards we have, I'm already like, wow, this is the most deck building I've actually ever done in this game. And that's, yes, and I'm talking about G-Era too, because even though G-Era was fun, mostly Mid-G, I think Mid-G was the best deck building era in the game personally. But, easily the most fun deck building. If you gave us a side deck too, that would be absolutely insane. But we're now getting to the closing parts of the video. So over triggers, well, they're super fun for a casual format. When they do trigger at those super important moments, which is actually usually the last turn or two of the game, it definitely in a competitive game is super frustrating, and no one wants that. And the only solution is a best of 3 format, which we should already have by default. Or just the banning of them in level 2 or higher tournaments. Tell me what you guys think below on what you think would be the better solution, or if you can come up with another solution on your own. Personally, I would have had over triggers work differently, which I may make into a different video if you guys wouldn't want that. Just comment down below if you do on my theories of how they could have reworked over triggers to be a more fair thing that would work for both casual and competitive play. Well, with that being said, I hope you guys liked the video, and as always, keep playing the games you want to play and have fun.